Camilla Gentil.
And I'm Mark Rosati.
And this is Passport Necessary, a podcast dedicated to growing up as a TCK and how it's affecting us now that we are adults. And today's episode is called, Is it Spring Yet?
Yeah.
Because
always a question everybody asks.
I feel like there comes a point in the wintertime around like March-ish where you're like, is it the end? Have we come to the end of winter yet? Have we gotten to spring yet? The answer is no. It is not officially spring yet. Actually, for this year, in the Northern Hemisphere, spring officially starts March 20th and will end June 20th. So the spring equinox falls on March 20th. It is the day where spring is officially sprung.
There was that stupid joke. Sorry, it's completely stupid, but there was like a little poem that somebody once had. It says, "The spring is sprung, the grass is riz. I wonder where the birdies is." It's like some terrible thing I got told as a child. It's stuck with me forever.
Oh, man. I know that there's one saying that's always around when spring comes about where it's April showers bring May flowers. I don't know where that comes from because at least in like northern US where I am on the East Coast, it's like winter, like we get snow into April.
That makes sense. It's funny because different places have different things, because we had that episode on Setsubun, didn't we, where in Japan they kind of consider the spring starting slightly earlier because of I suppose where they are in the world. And it's interesting, like in different places how it starts. Because in Japan, obviously, it depends. I mean, this year, I can't remember when Setsubun was this year. Was it the 3rd February?
It is earlier in the year. Wait, I can look. I had that information down. But Setsubun definitely was earlier this year, whereas February 2nd.
Oh, wow, very early.
Yeah, very early this year. And then, like, officially March in the Northern Hemisphere... officially spring in the Northern Hemisphere is March 20th. So it's, like, a whole month, almost a month and a half later.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting. It's interesting, like, how different cultures will perceive it, because, I mean... In Britain, the things that you notice when you sort of, like, going... There's sort of spring on the horizon. One of the ones that you kind of notice, the first thing that happens is in Britain there's this little flower that appears, and I suppose it's got this it's kind of like a tulip. It looks like that, but its head points towards the ground, and it's called a snowdrop. And they start to appear, and so this year the first ones I kind of noticed sort of have started appearing end of January, so that's sort of an unusual one.
Oh, wow.
As a flower, it's one of the few ones that does this, but it appears very, very early in the year. And one of my relatives put up something on Facebook taking a photograph going, like, "Oh my God, spring's coming." This is like, it's still January, but yeah,
we got time.
Yeah.
We've got so much time. That's always the thing go ahead.
Sorry, it's just one of those things that you just I think particularly sort of into the middle of February and end of February, everyone's going, can it just warm up, please? Can we just stop having the rain and the ice and the wind? Jesus, can we just stop it, please?
I always find it so funny here in Buffalo because every year winter is so much longer than people think it's going to be. They're always like, oh, like soon winter's going to be done. And they say that in March. And it's like, yo, we got another month. Like, we're definitely going to have snow in April. We've had snow all the way into the beginning of May. So, like, I love when people are like, oh, spring is getting close. It's going to be so warm and nice. And it's like, we got a while. Like, this. You live through it every year. Especially people from Buffalo who have been here their whole lives. And then they're shocked that it's still winter. I'm like, you've lived here. You know what this is like. I'm not from here. And I know to expect another couple months of winter. Like, just calm down. I know it's exciting. And the snow is going to melt at some point. But it's not right now.
No, it's never when you want it, is it? It's just one of those things. It's funny because I think in Japan the thing is I remember you get into March time and you're kind of going, right, this is like getting better, and the weather would get considerably better. It would be quite a bit warmer as far as I remember. My memory could be a bit less good than it used to be because it's been a while since I've actually had a springtime in Japan. But the thing is that in Britain, you kind of expect things to sort of like really start picking up in April. April is sort of like you kind of go, right. And in Britain, it doesn't snow that much because we have like the Gulf Stream, which comes up from sort of like, well, I think from around Mexico and then comes up towards Britain and keeps the country warm. That's why Britain has such mild winters, because the Gulf Stream keeps the country warm because it brings all this stuff, warm water with it and things like that. So winters in Britain generally very mild. You're kind of like looking at it and talking in Celsius, so you're talking. Normally, things sort of sit around 5 degrees C to 10 degrees C. That's kind of most of the time, as far as I'm aware, in my experience. It does drop lower at times. I mean, at the moment, at the time of recording, we've had what they call Beast from the East 2, which is basically weather moving in from Siberia
Oh.
and Russia. That happened in 2018 and it's happened again this year. But I mean, honestly, certainly, I remember the one in 2018 was worse. There was a lot more snow, but this time it's kind of like there was snow, but it wasn't that bad for York anyway. But like you kind of in Britain would expect this sort of thing to sort of like really sort of finish up at about mid to late March. You're kind of like thinking, yeah, things are getting better now. It's going to be a bit warmer, and that's when things like daffodils and things like that appear. It's like, you know, famous from Wordsworth. Can't remember how it went. Wandered lonely as a cloud over hills and valleys or something like that. I just can't remember how it went, but it's all about daffodils. And people in Britain, I think they actually deliberately plant daffodils along the roads. So you'll see like miles after mile after of
That's a
daffodils
lot
just
of
along the roadside.
daffodils.
Oh yeah, it is. I mean, they're considered like one of their special flowers. So people love daffodils. I suppose because it is like this is the first sort of real spring flower that you see.
It gives you a bit of hope, especially when you
Yeah.
have longer winters. I can understand when you are in like Canada or Russia or like
Oh yeah.
Northern Europe where it's cold and
Yeah.
their winters are so long that the moment you get something that gives you the hope of, hey, winter might be ending. Oh my gosh, I can understand how you would hold on tight to that. You'd be like, please,
Yeah.
please, please, spring is almost here. We're gonna get out of it soon. Like I can completely understand how those little symbols and signs of warmer weather approaching really
Yeah.
gets you excited.
Yeah. I mean, it's also that kind of like also how the air seems to change. It feels a little less crisp, I suppose. There's all that sort of things like there's like you kind of like tune into sort of like slightly different things. It's how the earth smells, how everything feels changes. It's kind of, I don't know whether it's just sort of like you make it up in your head because you want to see it, but you kind of get a sense that things are changing, not just because of things that you can see, but also how the air feels and
Oh, it
how
definitely
much wind and
changes.
stuff. Yeah.
It totally changes. The weather completely, but you can feel it even in the moisture. Like the moisture of the
Yes.
air is completely different. But I think it's interesting how in every culture there is some sort of festival that brings in spring. So like we've mentioned before, like Hanami is one of the many festivals. I mean, Setsubun is the official spring festival,
Yes.
but Hanami is also one of those spring type festivals because you're celebrating flowers. You're literally celebrating the blossoming of a specific type of flower, which is the cherry blossom. So that is a type of spring festival. And then another one, when I was doing like some very basic research, another one that comes up is Holi, which is a spring festival. It's also a festival of color and of love. And it is a festival that celebrates the triumph of good over evil, which I can see how people would find that so important because spring being a time of growth, fertility, the earth is growing again, could see that as a symbol of good versus evil, like winter, where things are, it's not death, but it's the earth is going quiet for a little bit. And this festival, Holi, comes from a Hindu. It's a Hindu religious festival.
Okay. Okay. That makes sense.
I actually remember celebrating Hindu. Sorry, I remember I didn't celebrate Hindu. I remember celebrating Holi once when the only year that I was living in Yokohama, and we had a couple families on our little compound where we lived on who were Indian families, and I remember we like went out and I saw them like holding like just powders of color, and they were
Oh,
throwing
right,
it
yeah.
at each other. And my brother and I were so excited. We were like, "What are you guys doing?" And they were like, "Go put on some white clothes and then come out and join us." We're like, "Okay, yeah, cool, whatever." Like that sounds great. So we started playing, and it was just you kind of had to get wet so that it would stick to you.
Right, yeah.
And it's cold. Like that was cold water we got into, but we like got doused in water, and then we had just packets of color in our hands that we would throw at each other. And I
Right,
remember
yes.
it like permanently stained one of my bras for like I could never get rid of it. Like I just always had color on it. My mom was so mad at me. She was like,
Well,
"Why didn't you wear like a sports bra that you don't care about?" I was like, "I don't know. I just ran outside and played with my friends. I don't care. I'm like 12 years old."
nobody's going to see it.
No one's gonna see this bra. Trust me. Like it's fine. But I remember it being so much fun. I don't remember like the context why we were necessarily doing it because I wasn't in touch with that and I didn't remember asking my friends about it. But I remember them saying like we're celebrating Holi. Like this is a very special time for us and this is part of it. We celebrate color. And I remember
Yeah.
thinking, what a great idea. Like that's awesome. I love that. So yeah, I that's one of the few memories the only memory I have of ever celebrating and being part of celebration of Holi.
Okay, that's interesting. 'Cause I don't know anything about Hinduism at all. It's like very little. I mean, very little. So it's. But I suppose because of the kind of thing that it is, it's more obvious what the festival is about. I suppose, like as in Europe, because of the Christianity and stuff like that, they kind of got rid of a lot of those festivals, or kind of what's the word, adopted or co-opted them to fit in within sort of a religious setting. So things, particularly Easter and Lent and all that sort of stuff, I suppose, kind of fit into a end of winter, beginning of spring type sort of festival, and into that sort of idea of how the world works. I mean, it does fit into that. So, obviously, as we were talking about last week, we're allowed to refer to last week, aren't we?
Yes, we can refer to last week.
Yeah, so like, Mardi Gras and Pancake Day and all that sort of stuff are all things that would be associated to an extent with spring and that sort of thing. It all fits into that. It's just interesting to. I mean, don't the Japanese, do they have a national holiday on the March equinox? I think they do. They do it for the autumn one, definitely. So I assume that they do it for the spring one.
I would guess so. I'm not 100% sure. I
No.
was I was actually just looking a little bit further into Holi because it was interesting to me. And so what's really cool about it is that the specific thing I was referring to is called Rangwali Holi. The free for all festival of color. And so the idea is that you smear each other and drench each other in color. So you get wet and then you use powdered color or actual like paint and you cover other people with this color. And anyone can have this happen to them. A friend, stranger, rich, poor, anyone participates in Holi and you can involve anyone in Holi. So it really is like a big group celebration. And the idea is that you play and it kind of involves everyone everywhere. And they sing and dance and it's big a celebration. Like it's supposed to be very fun. There's gossip, food, and drink. Like it's supposed to be highly celebrative, which I love this. I know I'm still thinking about it as a concept, but that makes sense to me now, where my friends involved us in it, even though we weren't part of it. We didn't know what we were necessarily getting involved in, but the idea that anyone can participate in it and everyone is supposed to participate in it because it's kind of a fair game.
Yeah.
That makes sense that they would be like, you come and join us even though you have no idea what this is. Like you're going to be a part of this now because anyone can be involved. I really like that inclusivity where it's like you are part of it automatically because it is a special day.
Yeah, that kind of makes sense, though. A lot of these festivals have that kind of attitude, don't they? They're collaborative. They are inclusive. Because I mean, it makes sense that a festival would be, or a special day like that would be, because why would you try and shunt people out unless there was some sort of thing about the festival that was, I don't know, exclusive? I mean,
Or
festivals tend not to be.
reinforcing, yeah, reinforcing like group dynamics.
Yes, yeah, right, like yeah. I mean, there are some things I suppose that do exist that are a bit like that, but I mean, they're rare, generally speaking.
And
They're
it
not
also makes
that
sense
common.
within spring. The idea
Yes.
of, life is coming back into the earth, things are growing, animals are going to be giving birth soon. Like, it's a big
Hmm.
time of like, there's growth and health and happiness. So it would make sense that you would want to involve as many people as possible.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like spring. I think the for me, I actually don't mind winter that much.
Hmm.
So for me, it's not as like, oh my God, I can't wait for it. Like a lot of people here have that feeling of like, oh my gosh, I just can't wait until it's spring. I think for
Hmm.
me, the only reason I always am hesitant with spring is that it means that summer's coming next, and I am
Right.
not really a big fan of summer. I don't like the heat. I don't like feeling
Right.
sweaty
Yeah.
and gross, and that just like
Hmm.
that is the summer to me. It's just ugh. It feels
Yeah.
so
It's just
gross.
it's like it's a warning of things to come.
Exactly. It's
No,
like
switch it off.
exactly. That was I think one of the reasons I liked living in Guatemala so much
Hmm.
is that in Ciudad de Guatemala, which is such a high altitude city, like it's in the mountains. You're
Hmm.
really far up. And so because of that, the weather there is very mild.
Right. Okay.
It I remember being told by my mom it was like an eternal spring. Like there was
Mm.
always plants growing. It was a very fertile area, and because of all the volcanic activity, it also meant that that made the land very fertile too.
Yes.
So it was a place where like it never really got cold
Hmm.
in Guatemala, and it never really got super hot either. It was always this
Yeah.
kind of mild spring-like temperature all the time throughout the year. And I loved
Okay.
that. I was a huge fan. I was like, this is great. If it could be like this all the time, I would be very happy.
Yeah. It would be nice, wouldn't it? It's like because certainly like the thing is that I suppose in Japan the springs like it tended to be quite pleasant. It would get
Hmm.
warmish, but not too warm. I mean, it would get warm to the point where you're going to go, yeah, it's sort of like I can't maybe like I can't remember if it actually got to about 20 degrees, but it must have done. I think it probably did on some days. Through sort of March, April time, you're looking at temperatures rising to about that, as far as I can remember.
Hmm.
And I suppose the thing in Japan, the difference between Japan and Britain, particularly, is that in Britain, obviously, the further north you go, the longer the nights become. So in Britain, you're kind of like sitting there around Christmas time, it'll be dark at 4 in the afternoon, and it doesn't get light until about 8, half 8 in the morning. And it's just like it's miserable in the winter in Britain because of that long period of darkness. So the thing is that particularly as the days get longer in spring, it feels really good. And the thing is that springs in Britain is generally speaking very mild. It's a very temperate sort of place. So the thing is that as it gets warmer, April is always I always use, well this year I'm not going to bother, but I mean I would normally book off time in April because that's going to be the weather's going to be all right. It's not going to be too warm. It's not going to be too cold. It's probably not going to rain that much. It's going to be all right, generally speaking, in April, sort of towards the end time, and that's a really nice time to have that sort of thing. And there are other things in Britain that sort of turn up that are famous, things like bluebells and all that sort of stuff. They talk about
Bluebells.
yes,
I
talk
love
about
the
going into the bluebell
name.
wood. Yeah. But it's a real thing that happens in Britain that I don't see it that often because it's not going to happen in the middle of a city. But I mean, if you go out into the countryside a bit and you go to a place, bluebells like sort of not really thick forest, but sort of like sort of they're like woodland, but it can't be too dense, and you will get like carpets of bluebells. And one of those things as a child, I used to see pictures of that and think, oh, I'd like to see that one day. And I never saw it. And then one day I did, and I was like, oh, it really does happen. It's not just made up. It's not
It's a
just
real thing.
it's real. And it's more common than I thought it was, actually. It does happen in quite a lot of places. I'm not sure why bluebells do that, but they do. And they all come up at the same time, so you do have like huge carpets of bluebells. Um,
I know
but
that one of the things that's really big, also for the spring is tulips.
oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I know a lot of people get really excited for tulips in the springtime. Like
Mm.
if you look at any spring imagery here in the States, I don't
Hmm.
know if it's in other countries as well, but I know that in the States, when spring starts coming around and you see like things that are marketed
Hmm.
specifically as spring or Easter as well, it will
Yes.
always have tulips on it. Like there's always like some sort of tulip. There's usually a daffodil. But yeah, like
Hmm.
that was something where I remember when I came back to the States, I remembered thinking like, what is it with all the tulips? Like they're pretty flowers, don't get me wrong. I mean, for there was a whole period of time in the Netherlands where they literally used tulips as a form of
Oh,
currency.
because they created a huge bubble.
Yeah, it
Really weird.
was very strange. But I remember thinking like, yeah, they're really pretty flowers, but like, what is the obsession with the tulips? Like, I don't get it. But I think it's just because they really start popping up around spring.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
And here in Buffalo, once it is the right weather for tulips to start growing, they're everywhere. Like people
Yes.
must hire gardeners so that they can get tulips in the ground because they get
Oh yeah,
so
they must do.
excited by the thought of tulips.
It's yeah. I wonder what it is because different cultures will do different things. I can't think of specific thing. I mean, obviously in Japan, it's always going to be the cherry blossoms and all that sort of stuff. That's an important one that you see.
Oh
And
man, I love the cherry blossoms. They're
yeah.
so pretty. They always make me excited. I know that was something that when I lived in DC for 1 year, that because there were trees that were given to the US as a gift from
Ah.
Japan, there
Yeah.
are like real cherry blossoms that are from Japan that
Hmm.
um, grow there. And there's like a modified version of Hanami that happens in DC. And I
Okay.
remember when we would walk around seeing them during the springtime and thinking, oh, it's so lovely. I now remembered another reason why I'm not crazy about spring is because when I was living in DC, I found out that I had a really bad allergy to dandelions and they grow
Oh no.
everywhere in DC. Like it had never been a problem
No.
for me. I never really encountered them when I was living in Louisiana. Didn't really encounter them when I was in South Korea. Didn't
Hmm.
encounter them when I was in Guatemala. But when I moved to DC and it was the springtime, they were freaking everywhere. And I'd never had headaches like that before in my life.
Oof.
And it was just like months of both my dad and I just being incapacitated. My dad was so much
Ouch.
worse because he has far more allergies to
Mm.
nature, just like trees in general. So
Mm.
it just like totally wiped him out for that year. But I remember for me, when it was spring, I was just like, why is this so bad? Like,
Yeah.
why am I just constantly miserable and having headaches? And when we found out that it was because of dandelions, I was like, well, that explains everything because they're everywhere here. Like, you would just walk down the street and they're weeds, so they're everywhere.
Yes. Yeah.
And then kids, because they're awful, would take dandelions and when they're puffy, they would take them and they would blow them in my face because I thought it
Ugh.
was funny.
Uh, yeah, kids can be really cruel.
Yeah, kids are so wonderful. Don't you want
Yeah.
kids? They're the best. No, I don't like them. They're awful. I'm joking. I actually do enjoy
No.
children, just not my own.
Yeah.
I don't have any. There's a
No.
reason.
Yeah. That's fair enough.
But
Uh,
yeah, I don't mind
it's
spring, but I don't think I'm crazy about it like a
mm.
lot of people seem to be. I'm a fall girl. I love the
Oh yeah,
fall.
that makes sense.
I'm a big fan of fall and winter. I'm a
Yeah.
bigger girl. I don't like being in warmer weather. I like being in like anything that's like flannel sweaters so I can feel comfy and like
Hmm.
bundled up. I like having tea and I feel like when you start having warm weather, it makes me not want to have those warm comfy drinks anymore. And it's
Yes.
at a point where I'm like, I just want to have my warm comfy drinks.
That kind of makes sense. I suppose the thing is yeah, because I think in Japan, I can't remember when it starts, but they have that huge pollen season, don't they? Because they've got. I
Mhm.
think what happened was it's like they planted a lot of pine trees because they wanted to be able to use the wood, which makes sense, but they never got round to using it all or something like that. So they have huge pine forests. I think that's how it happened. That release, or obviously they're all going to release their pollen at the same time. So there's a huge hay fever season, which is based around the pine trees. Whereas I think in Britain the problem is it's the grasses that will do it, because obviously you've got meadows and stuff like that and things like that. So the thing is that the grasses just all hurt their pollen out at the same time, and then that's what the problem is. I don't think it tends to be the trees as much in Britain as it tends to be things like grasses and stuff like that.
Does
that
it
really cause the problem?
Does it rain a lot in the UK during the spring? Or is it more summer?
I tend to see sort of like between sort of like mid-April until end of June, middle of July tends to be all right. It doesn't tend to be that bad. And then once you sort of like get halfway through July and then into August, it just starts raining. So all the really hot days tend to be sort of like slightly further forward in the year. And then it starts really just raining a lot in August and stuff like that. The past few years, it hasn't happened so much, but I mean, it's the nice times are sort of between sort of mid-April and into
I was
June.
just curious because the few times that I went to visit England have always been during the like spring, summer months. And every time I went to visit England, before I went, everyone would be like, oh, it's going to be rainy, it's going to be cloudy, it's going to be gloomy. And every time I went to the UK, I think for the total amount I went, there was one day where it just rained the whole time. Right. And I was like, well, I'm here anyway, so I'm just going to go out. Like, I don't care. Like, I have a few days in the UK. I'm going to go where I want to go. But,
yeah, exactly.
But yeah, I was just curious because I remember going and everyone was like, it's going to rain the whole time. And I was like, it didn't. It was beautiful. Like, it was sunny the whole time. I got sunburned. Like, it was not pleasant.
Yeah, I think the thing is the winters tend to be a bit miserable, because when it rains, it's dark, it's cold, and then it's just like it feels worse. And then I think in the summer months, the frustration is, I think, the sort of bad weather sort of like happens sort of when people actually go for the summer holidays.
Right.
Sadly. So, because the school holidays in Britain are 6 weeks long. I can't remember when they start and end because I don't have children either, so it's not important to me. But that's the thing, is you have the 6 week holidays in the summer, and it does tend to fall. It's mid-July through August and then back in September, generally speaking. So that's when the more unpleasant weather happens anyway. August is not really a particularly fun month.
Yeah. I remember in Paris during the spring, it being I remember it being kind of gloomy, but the weather would be definitely nicer. It wouldn't be as cold. That's why I always think about if I were to have, if Jay and I were to go back to France, which I do want to do again one day.
Yes.
I always think, I'm like, oh, if we go, I want to go in the mid-end of spring. Because then there's not as many tourists. It's not too hot yet. And it's still there's still things to do. It's not like in the winter where a lot of stuff gets more limited because it's cold and people don't want to go out as much. So there's less activities. That's the one thing I do like when I see spring starting up, is it means more activities are going to start happening, especially here in Buffalo. During the winter, there's a huge reduction. I mean, outside of COVID times, definitely once summer and once the spring starts to happen, you see more events, more readings, art, poetry, outdoor events start happening. And that's when the city really comes alive. And it's so nice to see, because there's a lot of the city that people forget about during the winter. And then when the spring and summer comes around, you're like, oh, right, I forgot they do this. Why is it only now? And it's well, because no one wants to go outside. Everyone wants to stay indoors and drink. So there's nothing happening.
But I suppose, especially if you've got much harsher weather in the winter, much more snow and things like that, it makes things more difficult.
Oh, yeah.
In Britain, it doesn't it's not as bad as people make out. You do have some flurries of snow and stuff, but the reason that everything stops when the snow comes is because British people are just not really equipped for it, and they don't really need to be. You're not going to really sort of spend thousands and thousands of pounds on getting the snow plows and everything like that if it's only going to be well, it's going to disrupt us for 2 or 3 days, and you're going, we're going to spend what, £20,000 to sort out something that happens over 3 days. It's nah, screw it.
Yeah,
there's no point. But
no, if you didn't do that here in Buffalo, the system would shut down because we get so much snow. We've already had probably, I would say, 2 major snowstorms in this winter, where it was it snowed for multiple days in a row and there was a visible accumulation.
Right. Yeah.
Even in the city, where like it's a weird
Right.
thing where like Buffalo, the way it's set up is that we're we're on the Lake Erie, and that when it
Right.
snows, the winds kind of part around the city. So the
Hmm.
south of Buffalo gets hit really badly with snow, and then the
Hmm.
north of Buffalo gets hit really badly with snow. But the city of Buffalo itself kind of escapes a lot of it.
Okay, yeah, that makes
So we'll
sense.
still get snow, but it will never be as bad as what the north and the south of Buffalo get. And they get hit like with feet.
Right. Okay, that makes sense though. That does. That's really interesting.
Yeah, that's probably why
That
they're
does make
so
sense.
desperate for spring to be here.
I just one of those things is that we're talking about it. I've been talking about it with a couple of people, and I've had a chance to speak to them over the current British lockdown. Um, but it was things like we're talking about York and things like that, because like there's been like areas around York tend to seem to get snow more heavily than York does. And my hypothesis is, I'm not sure, but I think that York is actually closer to sea level than most of the towns and cities around it, so it doesn't get as bad. I think that's why it doesn't get such bad snow, because everybody around us has been going, "Oh my God, there's been lots of snow. It's settled. It's done this. It's done that." And going, "It hasn't happened here," and I just assume that it's because York is slightly lower down, so it's not as cold. Because he hasn't had that bad of a time, and York, generally speaking, doesn't get that bad of a time. So, but when spring comes around, you are looking at things in York, things like first one is uh, the snowdrops, and then you're looking for daffodils, which come a couple of months, well, a month or so later, and then you're looking for the bluebells, which come about a month after that. And by that time, all the leaves are on the trees and all that sort of stuff. So it's one of those interesting ones, actually. It's just like you've got those three flowers. We're looking for each and every one, and then by the time it comes around to it, we know that we're in the summer.
It's here. We got
Yeah,
this.
we've done it.
We made it to spring. Another
Yes.
year has been vanquished. Yeah. Well, this has been fun. I like
Yeah.
talking about this stuff. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. This was really lovely talking to Marcus about spring.
Hmm.
If you have any questions, comments, you want to leave us a review, please feel free to do so. We absolutely love to see it. And if you want to reach out to us, we do have a Twitter. You can reach out to
Hmm.
us. It's at Passport NECESS1. So feel free to write to us, leave us a message, whatever it may be. We're always happy to see that. And we'll see you next time.
Happy
Bye.
hours. Right. Bye.